Okay? Right. So, back to the Surrealists. When you think about the Surrealism, you should think about it as being a way of viewing the world. It's not just an art movement. They were interested in changing the whole world and thinking about the world in a completely different way. Why? Well, because they saw the rationality of World War One, and the Dadists came first, but the Surrealists were there as well, and they saw that World War One, which was this purely logical, conscious, very structured way of looking at the world, engineered, it caused all this disruption and all this death. And they basically said, well, how is that a good thing? What we need is we need to look at the world in a completely different way. And Andres Breton, who wrote the Surrealist Manifesto, in fact he wrote 3 Surrealist manifestos, said what we need to do is we need to join the unconscious, which Freud has come up with, the id and all of this idea, plus the conscious. So we need to join these 2 ideas together so that we've got Surrealism and, or we've got Surrealism in the middle, but we've got the unconscious and we've got consciousness and, or reality, and we join them together so that we've got Surrealism in the middle. What this ended up doing was the conventions that you would find in Surrealist work would be, well, firstly, all creativity comes from the unconscious. That's something they hold very, very dear. Okay, there's an idea of anti-narrative. They don't like logical narrative that follows one thing after another. There's an idea of anti-cause and effect, because cause and effect is very logical, isn't it? You do something and there's a response. Unexpected juxtapositions. Remember what I've said before about juxtapositions? Juxtapositions are 2 objects that naturally wouldn't occur together. So the Surrealists love this because it's very dreamlike, it's very unconscious, but with that element of reality in it as well. And also they want to have fun with it, this whimsiness. It's very silly, but they're also very, very anti-bourgeois. But you should think about Surrealism as being something which is very political. They want to protest. They want to say, no, we need a new way of looking at the world. We are very anti-bourgeois, but Surrealism generally, and something we're going to look at later, is how Surrealism has been used politically to protest at the status quo, at the people who are in charge. It's very, very, it's very much like a protest movement almost. So those are the basic things that we look at with Surrealism, those elements there. There are others, but those are some things to think about. Okay, let's look at this, dreams. Okay, so with Surrealism, dreams are very, very important because they're being seen as the interaction between the unconscious and the conscious mind. So dreams are great. We love dreams if we're a Surrealist. Obviously, they believe that the unconscious is the dominant force in the dream. So it's great because the unconscious is coming through and we can start to see it develop into ideas and things that we can then remember when we wake up. So coming back to the idea that we've got here, the definition that we've got of Surrealism. Dada, of course, they're all about removing bourgeois, protesting against bourgeois, but replacing it with nothing. Surrealism, more positive, and they want to fuse that conventional logical view of reality with the unconscious, the dreamlike experience, in order to achieve this super reality. Okay, let's talk about the Surrealists and the cinema. So Bruel and Salvador Dali, these are 2 that we're going to look at, and they make a little film called Un Chant Andalou. But first, let's think about it in terms of the cinema. If we look at this, look at that. That's the cinema that's probably in Paris around the time that the 2 of them made On Chandelou, 1929. A great big hall. When the lights go down, it's very, very dark. And Breton, when he wrote the Surrealist Manifesto, loved cinema because it was dark. And where do we see this dark place? Well, when you close your eyes, you're cuddling up in bed, it's very dark. When you are born, remember the id, when you are born, or rather before you're born, you're a baby inside your mother's womb. It's very dark, it's very, very warm, it's very safe, and the only images that you're getting are the images in your own mind, the dreams. So cinema is fantastic for this sort of thing because it replicates this. The darkened room as well is something that they like because it's democratizing, which means that everybody, once the lights go down, everybody inside the cinema is exactly the same. You can't see somebody else's clothes and you can't say, oh, they're more posh than I am. Everybody is exactly the same when you're in a darkened room. And that's great because they don't like class. They want to do away with class. Remember, class was something that they saw as being one of the reasons, or the people who were involved in World War One were very distinctively the upper class, who were pushing the working class people into going and attacking and dying for their country. So they didn't like the idea of class. So then also, what Breton was saying was the space within the cinema itself is surreal. The act of going into a darkened room is like entering a dream. The darkened room subverts realism, and when you're watching the screen, it's like you're watching a dream that's playing out. So, coming back to these ideas as well, it's just a way of viewing the world, and that's really, really interesting. When it comes to cinema, unlike all the other art forms it was about, remember, cinema's only been about 20 years or so in real terms. They love this new technology that allows them to almost recreate a dream on screen. So, if we take a look at the specification, right, what we are looking at is how the investigation should be subsumed within national cinema. So it has to include the following: the relationship of films to their immediate political, economic, social and cultural contexts. Now, we have looked at the political context, World War One, right, and then coming out of World War One. The economic, well, not so much, but we have looked at the social and cultural context. How are films like this made? Well, they're made to protest almost against this bourgeois idea of what reality should be and what art should be. So there's a big protest for that. You want to know about the relationship between the films to their context of production and reception. So when you're watching a surrealist film, what is it about it that is making it a surrealist film? And then the significance of whether individuals or collectives of people within a nation in shaping a distinctive kind of cinema. Now, what we're going to look at in the following couple of talks that I'm going to do is about how we look at different films, and we're going to look at Antoine Delou, we're going to look at a filmmaker called Svankmajer, and we're going to look at another Czechoslovakian filmmaker who made a film called Daisies. And we're going to look at how each of those films, which was made, Antoine Delou, 1929, Svankmajer working in the late 80s, well, from 1960s right through to the late 80s, and how this film Daisies, made in the 1960s, all relate to the times in which they were made, and also the political context in which they're made, and what they're trying to say as they do that. So we're going to look at all of that. Then also, the importance of indigenous cinema as creative and commercial response to the hegemony of Hollywood. So we're going to think about what it was that was going on in Hollywood at the time when particularly Antoine Delou was made, and how that is reflected in Antoine and Delou, and what is it about Antoine Delou that kind of goes against our idea of what's happening in Hollywood at the time. So let's take a look at traditional Hollywood cinema. In 1927, Buster Keaton, no, is it Buster Keaton, the General? I think it's Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin make this film called The General, and it's typical Hollywood film, beginning, middle, and end. It's very funny, but very, very chronological narrative. Then what happens is in 1929 we have Buell and Dali, and they make the most famous surrealist film of all time. I'm a bit dramatic by that, but they do make this brilliant film, and I've mentioned it before. There he is, Buell, and there he is, Dali, with his moustache, the starting of his moustache there, which then gets longer and longer. And they make this film called Antoine and Delou. And, well, that's a piece of homework, but don't worry about that. We're going to get onto Antoine and Delou in some detail in the next session that I do with you. But I hope this has given you some kind of insight into what Surrealism is. I hope I haven't been waffling on for too long.